So I'm Eric Berger. I'm a professor of computer science at Georgetown University and the director of the Georgetown Center for Secure Communications. We've put together a panel here today to talk about cybersecurity. Now today seems to be Cyber Day. There are actually a number of parallel sessions going on today talking about cybersecurity. So we're actually, instead of talking about how buy my firewall and it'll save you all your trouble, or hey, there's no problem, don't worry about it, or the typical response, which is head in the sand, it can't happen to me, or things like we'll have a totally separate network, we'll be totally safe, which is why General Alexander, or no, it wasn't General, it was the other guy, went public with Bill Lynn went public with, and this is what happened to CyberNet, the Department of Defense secure IP network, which was totally disconnected, which is how it got a virus. The other thing that makes this topical is there are a number of legislative proposals going on the Hill right now, because we have to do something about cybersecurity, and whenever Congress has to do something, that's kind of a cause for people who understand the technology to get nervous. And so, one of the themes today will be, is there a better path? So, talking today, first will be Zach, and then we have online. Actually, last will be Simpson, because hopefully by the time he goes, he'll be able to talk again. But he has a distinction. I think you're one of the few people younger than me in the class of '83.
Class of '83?
At MIT.
I was class of '87.
You were '87? Oh, then you weren't younger than me at all. You were on time. We have...
he was 83, but he didn't finish.
83 was my high school class.
High school class. There you go. Yeah, well, I was 84, 83, 84, but that's a long story. We have Thomas and Mark, who also will be speaking on the topic. Well, I'll start first with Zach, who's going to tell us everything we know is wrong.
Yeah, hi, I'm Zach Judah, and I'm here with the Computer Science Lab at SRI International. And I have a long, if not distinguished, career and expertise in cybersecurity along all sorts of domains, government, military, commercial, intelligence. And I know that a lot of our other panelists are going to talk about some of the different challenges that we have in security for 2020, whether it's in the enterprise, networks, the broader infrastructure, the issues of privacy, laws and regulation, and usability, which really impacts what I think is the key issue, is how humans use computers securely. But my personal feeling is that all those things are wonderful, but in 2020 we will be faced with most of the same challenges we have today. Things will have changed, we'll have more capabilities, we'll continue to have vulnerabilities and attacks, data breaches, etc. So if nothing else, things will hopefully stay the same. Constant will be the new better, if you will, but things probably won't improve. My personal work these days really centers around critical infrastructure, and that can mean a lot of different things to people. So besides being able to keep the lights on and the water running and relatively pure, it also includes things like the payment system. And we were looking just the other day at why the U.S. still lags behind the rest of the world in using chip and PIN, and it is the same story over and over again in all of our environments. Compatibility with legacy systems forces us to have a lowest common denominator security implementation. And until you can leapfrog a technology as the third world may do, because they didn't have, say, embedded infrastructure, they're able to go directly to wireless, and so they're able to use some of the newest wireless technologies that it will take developed nations much longer to bring in. We're doing a lot of work in the U.S. on the smart grid. People that are in the power industry will say that the grid right now is one of the smartest collective machines that we have, but we're going to add intelligence to it that will also allow we users to do things to electricity and the grid and reliability that we never had the chance to do before. There will be lots of benefits there, but there may also be some impediments that, despite a lot of good work being done in that area, we haven't yet had the chance to understand. Embedded systems and things like electric vehicles. If you've seen some of the YouTube videos of people being able to remotely put someone's brakes on, or alternatively not allow someone to put their brakes on, could become a very interesting college prank. at MIT or other places where the engineers have the capability to do things in an advanced nature. But also embedded devices such as your embedded medical devices will be much more capable, but maybe, well, will definitely be less secure than they are today just by the fact of a larger attack surface. And so we'll have to also make sure that we understand those vulnerabilities and the risks that are involved. So I think there are a lot of challenges going forward. The one thing that I always remind people is that the largest class of attack always seems to center around things that can be monetized. Criminals attack us much more than terrorists because of the uncertain effects of cyber attack. Same reason why we just don't go and turn the lights off at all of our adversaries. You cannot as clearly predict the impact of a cyber attack as you can dropping a bomb or placing a bomb somewhere in a target. So if you're a terrorist and you want to instill fear, why do it via a cyber attack that a company or a country may hide, as opposed to just planting devices as we see them trying over and over to do. So I really think that the majority of our problems will continue to come from organized or disorganized crime. And for that, I'll wait for some others to talk, and then we can have some interesting discussion. For those of you, we were talking briefly on the phone the other day, and we had a quite interesting discussion there. Hopefully there will be some time for questions from anyone else, but we have a lot of questions for you.
That's right. That is actually the plan, and thank you very much for staying on time. Is some brief opening statements and then a lot of time for interaction. And if you guys can't think of anything, trust me, from our phone call, we know we can fill up the entire time. Thomas.
Thanks, Eric. Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here. I know you're going to be listening to all of us carefully to see where we disagree, so you should dive in. But
I disagree.
I actually agree with many of the points that Zach has made. I believe that cybersecurity is not a solvable problem. It's not a problem that can be solved once and for all. It's a pursuit. So I'm reminded of Sisyphus. Remember Sisyphus, that character from Greek mythology who can push a great big boulder up a hill forever. Cybersecurity is a lot like that. Very difficult, never-ending. It's not pointless. I think his task was rather pointless, but cybersecurity certainly is not. And the reason is that fundamentally everything in cyberspace is vulnerable. Every hardware and software component, every service, every application, every processing machine, everything within the cyber infrastructure is vulnerable to intrusion and exploitation. This is true from the enterprise level all the way up to the global internet, and that's not going to change. The internet itself, in my view, is a highly robust infrastructure. It's got security concerns, of course. There are scaling challenges. There are challenges, but the internet itself as an infrastructure has proven itself to be highly reliable in providing the two of the three components we think about in security: availability and data integrity. The internet is, by any measure, very, very reliable. The big security problems today are primarily at the enterprise level, where the content and the applications are. And of course, protecting this is left to the enterprise. So with everything being vulnerable, the question for the enterprise is, well, fine, but how vulnerable? And how do I make sense of that vulnerability in terms of risk to what I value in my business or my organization? That is a very difficult question to answer, and is one that would keep one very busy for a long time, even for a small enterprise. So I'd like to tee up just three of the big security challenges for the enterprise today in today's context, how we look at security today. And I won't have time to elaborate. First, I would cite identifying clear information protection requirements. How do you classify your information in terms of importance within the enterprise? Not easy. Second, understanding and controlling the attack surface. Now, this has a lot to do with policy and architecture and configuration management, with a little help from compliance requirements. But understanding and controlling your our own attacks are very, very challenging. And it's getting more difficult as users flood the typical enterprise with mobile devices that very often mix on the same platform enterprise data with personal content like songs, photos, personal email accounts, Twitter accounts, Facebook accounts, etc. And third, I would cite the day-to-day security operations within the enterprise. How do you manage platform configuration? Do you lock down the platforms that are in your infrastructure? How do you manage patches to software? How do you control access? How do you get and stay aware of the threat and vulnerability situation? How do you monitor the network status 24/7? How do you affect configuration changes in response to incidents? How do you deal with the threats that have gotten through undetected? To put in that category, what we call the advanced persistent threat, or sophisticated malware. How do you respond to incidents? Dealing with a breach usually requires some sort of external communication because a lot of times it's personal information at stake. How do you reconstitute? All very difficult challenges that today's enterprise leaders face. But finally, I'd like to shift gears and offer a few thoughts about what the next few years will bring to the enterprise. One, more mobile devices. A recent report by Cisco says that mobile traffic has more than doubled every year for the past 4 years and is projected to continue that for the foreseeable future. Currently, mobile traffic accounts for 75 petabytes per month on the global internet. Now, interestingly, last year, 2011, according to the Cisco report, mobile traffic alone on the internet was 8 times greater than the total traffic of the entire internet in the year 2000. Another major thing that the enterprise in the near term will have to deal with, the resolution of the IPv4 to IPv6 transition. The transition to IPv6 today is not what we would like it to be. It's lagging. But a few years from now, something's going to have to give in the interim, and there will be in a new place in a few years. That will have security implications of one kind or another. Third is the cloud. The mass migration to the cloud is only just beginning. It does represent a new way of doing business. The cloud presents unique security challenges. But we could talk for a long time about the security benefits and risks of movement to the cloud. Suffice to say that this will be a major part of the enterprise going forward. And a final area that I'd like to just throw out there is, we've all been monitoring with some interest the deployment, the expansion of what we call the Internet of Things. I assume you know what is meant by the Internet of Things, won't elaborate. And that's proceeding apace, but there's something that we haven't, I think, paid as much attention to, and that's what I call the Internet of People. Increasingly, we have the ability, and we're seeing a trend towards humans engaging with the internet through their physiology, implanted medical devices, Zach mentioned of. Today, it's for medical monitoring. Many people have devices. Let's say devices exist, I think deployment isn't that great yet, that can be implanted but have wireless links. You can go right to a medical service provider for analysis. We're going to see more of that, but it's going to go beyond medical purposes, and we develop new ways of engaging with the internet directly with the human, between the human and the machine. I think that's coming. That concludes what I wanted to say.
Good, because I was like, whoa! Mark, please.
My remarks will be brief, but I say that as a lawyer.
We only have.
I have a difficult task because I'm going to try to be more controversial than Simpson, and that's not going to be easy to do. I want to start with 3 observations. Number 1, we can't be secure. Number 2, we won't be secure. And number 3, stealing a little thunder from Simpson, we don't want to be secure. And let me explain what's going on here. You know, we have Kevin over here is studying economics and computer science. And when you look at economics, I remember Father Guido Sarducci had something called the 5-minute university. And the only thing I remember from economics is supply and demand. And we have right now exactly the amount of security that the marketplace demands. And the problem is that from a governmental or societal level, we have this fundamental gut reaction that that's not enough. We don't believe that we have enough security considering what we are asking the internet and internet technologies to do. We don't feel we have enough security in the event of the critical infrastructure, for example. We don't feel we have enough security to protect the privacy of certain types of information. And yet, we have what we have because it's what the marketplace has demanded. So the real challenge for regulators, for policymakers, and for the commercial sector is, first of all, challenge the assumption. I think we have exactly the amount of security that we're supposed to have. If we wanted more security, we would have more security. But putting that aside, if we as a policy decision decide we want to have more security, how do we skew the marketplace to get us to a point where we have more security? And how much security do we want to have? And that becomes a risk-benefit analysis and a reward-benefit analysis. So if you look at a lot of the legislation that's pending, it's trying to move that needle from where it is now to some point where it's going to be. And the first question I ask when I go into a company and try to do an assessment and stuff, they normally want to assess against a set of standards. And we decide what are the right standards, and then we assess them against the standards. Now, if you have an assessment and you pass the assessment, by the way, there's no such thing as passing an assessment, are you secure? And the answer is, as we all know here, you're not. And if you ask a company, which would you rather be? Would you rather pass an audit and still have known vulnerabilities? Or would you rather secure yourself but fail an audit? And the answer almost universally is, I'd rather pass the audit. Because they have to pass the audit. And they don't have to be secure. And so the problem with trying to skew the marketplace from a legislative and policy matter is everybody games the system. Everybody games any system that you give them. And unless being secure is part of the cultural DNA, you receive some kind of benefit from it from the marketplace, what you will do is you will engage in security theater. You will do things that make you look secure. You will do things that make people think that you are secure, rather than doing things that actually make you secure. So the real thing we need to look at is, how do we change the marketplace? How do we change the incentive system? Rather than saying you must be, how do we create incentives for people to continue to push the envelope? The other problem is, and speaking about pushing the envelope, is that if you set a set of standards and say you must be here, there is little incentive to be beyond that. There's little incentive to develop new technologies that allow you to become more secure, or to deploy those if there's no financial benefit to you for doing so. So those are a couple of observations. Then finally, about legislation. There's legislation pending on the Hill, and by the way, the thing about legislation is obviously if pro is the opposite of con, then the opposite of progress is Congress, as we know. A little bit of etymology here. You know, this is all politics, and poly means many, mixed, blood-sucking creatures. So when we look at what we're trying to do on Capitol Hill, one of the things is to try to promote information sharing. And that starts with the assumption that if only we had more information, we would be able to do something about this problem of cybersecurity. There are areas in which information sharing can help, but it's hardly a panacea. We are not doing stuff with the information we already have. That's the first problem. The second problem is what we're trying to do is remove what we quote-unquote remove barriers to information sharing. Well, some of those barriers are the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, okay? The restrictions on domestic surveillance by the NSA, privacy laws that are designed to protect the privacy and integrity of the human being. So we start out, if we phrase it as all we're trying to do is remove barriers, it sounds great. If we say, you know what, we're going to create a surveillance society where everybody knows everything about everybody else, not so great. A lot of the barriers also are illusory. You know, people say, I'm not going to share information because I'm afraid of liability. All right, give me 3 instances where somebody's been sued successfully for it. Well, no, that's not the issue. I'm still afraid of liability. The real answer is, the reason people don't share information is they don't see a benefit to them to sharing information. They may see a benefit to them to receiving information, although there are downsides to that. So we need to look, if we just do a command and control, you must, we're never going to achieve the kind of security we want. We have to find a way to skew the marketplace to create greater incentives to secure.
So my daughter's going into 11th grade, and she finally agreed to take computer science, but she can't because it's not a science class, it's a math class, and she's tracked taking pre-calculus and then calculus because the symbolic mathematics mafia has said that you really shouldn't be studying statistics or algorithms in high school, that that's something that you should be studying in college, if at all. We should be teaching algorithmic thinking starting in middle school. Related to that is that we don't pay our teachers enough. So right now, if you are a mediocre computer programmer, you can get a salary between $90,000 and $150,000 a year. And if you are a mediocre, a very good high school science teacher, you can get a salary between $60,000 and $80,000 a year. So we systematically pull people who have any hope of teaching our children out of the schools, especially in science and technology. And even though a technologist can pull more than a writer, typically in the marketplace, we pay them the same in the schools. But it's worse than that, because when those students that learn computer science in college then decide to go on, they are finally now able to look at what the salaries are. And there's been good research on this at Georgetown, and technologists leave the field in college and go into medicine and law and business. And the reason is that the salaries paid to doctors and business professionals are dramatically more than the salaries paid to cybersecurity people. And so there's actually hard numbers here. You get 12,800 US citizens majoring in computer science and information technology at the bachelor's level, graduating each year, 12,800. But at the master's level, it's only 4,960. So we lose nearly 2/3 of them. And that's why half of the students getting master's degrees in the United States in computer science are foreign nationals, because those slots are not being filled by US citizens. And then at the PhD level, we had 1,782 PhDs last year, but only 642 of those were US citizens. What happened to the 4,300 that were graduating with master's degrees? They got out of the field. Now, why is IA, information assurance, so bad? Because of the 1,782 PhDs in computer science and computer engineering, only 67 of them were in information assurance. There's just no money here. Now, the fourth issue is immigration policy. Recall, 5,000, 50% of those master's students, and between 50% and 75% of the PhD students are foreign nationals. We then throw them out of the country. So we bring them here, we educate them at the taxpayer's expense significantly, and then we don't let them stay. Now, during the Cold War, we did not bring the brightest weapons scientists and nuclear scientists from Russia here, train them in nuclear technology, and then send them back to the Soviet Union. We just thought that would be bad public policy. But that's precisely what we're doing with the brightest of people from China and Pakistan and India. We bring them here and we educate them at the taxpayer's expense, and then we kick them out. And that has profound implications for both business policy, economic policy, and security policy. And then lastly is manufacturing policy. As long as I'm there, it makes no sense to buy computers from the country that is attacking you. If we want to be secure against China, we shouldn't be buying their computers. We shouldn't be building our computers there. Now, to put it in terms that that a policymaker can understand. This is like buying bombers from Nazi Germany during World War II, or during the run-up to World War
Actually,
II.
they made much better bombers. Though.
Yeah, we bought the Messerschmitts. Fighters, not the bombers.
While we were at war with them, we didn't buy their
No, we
fighters.
just took them.
So, in general, if we want to have security, it's much easier to booby-trap a system when it's being built in your country for sale in another country. It's much easier for us to detect supply chain vulnerabilities when they're inserted here. Not because we're going to have a factory of cleared employees, but because people are simply less likely to booby-trap things that they know are going to be used in their nation's infrastructure. So those are the 5 things: shortened development cycles, education, HR, immigration policy, and manufacturing policy. Until we make progress on those, we will not be able to have computers that are more secure today than they were yesterday.
I want to thank all of you for being precisely on time. This is great.
No.
Now the hard stuff starts, please.
So, first, I really liked all of these comments. I think it was a good job assembling this. I want to pick up on Mark's comment on supply and demand. As someone who's spent a lot of time thinking about the economics of information security, quick plug, end of June, Berlin, the 11th workshop on economics of information security is happening. It's a burgeoning field, but it needs new blood because right now it's just a bunch of business professors. And apply this sort of supply and demand back to the innovation question. Because Simpson talked about sort of what we might think is the raw ingredients. How do we get new stuff? I think one aspect that people aren't talking much about is the diffusion of the new widgets and ideas once we have them. And in fact, that's why I brought Kevin to Brookings this summer, is to start a project looking at what makes diffusion of security, products, services, ideas, different from your standard tech transfer story. Security is a loss. Right? No one ever buys this stuff because it's going to make them money. It often requires multiple parties to adopt simultaneously. The benefits aren't easily tested, so you don't get much around it. And so we need to understand the economics of how we're going to get this stuff, once we do discover it, out into the marketplace and deploy it. And I think that is very much an economics question.
Let me address a couple of things. The first one is security is a loss. If we separate security from the thing that's being secured, it's absolutely a loss. The problem is that's the way we do it. In budgets, internally, security has a budget. And I ask companies all the time, what percentage of your IT budget should you be spending on security? And they go anywhere from 3% to 11%, 12%. Very few go beyond that. And the answer is, it's a bullshit question. It is a bad question.
That's right.
Because you shouldn't be pegging your security budget to the value of the IT. You should be of the computers. It should be what would happen to your company if you couldn't use your computers, or you didn't have reliability, or if you didn't have confidentiality. And security should be an enabling technology. Now, the other thing you pointed out is about new technologies. There is no shortage of new technologies. There are no shortage of companies coming up with new technologies, particularly those out of Israel and stuff. There is a burgeoning marketplace for new technologies, new encryption technologies, new security technologies. The problem is, how do we get those into the marketplace and get adoption to that new technology? Because first of all, very few people want to be the first person to adopt it. And the second problem is the whole question that Simpson brought up, which is, I think you brought up the question of interoperability. And if I come up with a new technology that doesn't play nicely with my legacy systems, I'm not going to deploy it.
So, that's great. I actually tell people not to start computer security companies because there really is no upside for a company to invest in security technology.
We should get bought by both.
Well, let me finish it. We used to argue that security was an enabling technology, but it's more enabling to not have security and be lucky.
Yeah.
And so the market actually selects companies that spend no money on security and are lucky. we
And the ones that spend no money on security and are unlucky, they don't care.
So we sat down, I sat down with some NSF and some DARPA program managers about 2 months ago, and we came up with a list of all the security breakthroughs of the past 20 years that had actually been deployed and made a difference. And there were things like sandboxing, there were things like, and I can give you the list. But the question, and some of them were deployed and some of them were not deployed, but the problem that we realized was that every piece of security research that had discovered new ways for security systems had actually discovered better ways for attacking systems. And so what we see is that all the work that's for defending actually makes systems less secure. And that's a real problem. Now, going back to my HR problem, when I was at a company trying to sell security technology, we discovered that companies just didn't have enough people to buy this stuff. They had the budgets, but then a lot of the stuff got left on shelves because they didn't have the trained workforce to deploy them. It's all too hard to use, and it all doesn't actually work as intended.
I just wanted to say a quick thing. Mark kind of hit it on the head, though, for economics, supply and demand. Do we have the security that we want to? And one of my other big favorites these days, of course, is metrics. How do you understand the economics of cybersecurity if we can't measure whether something is effective, ineffective? Risk assessment is something that is definitely a science. I'm sorry, an art, a dark art at that. And so, for one example, is heartland payment systems, right? So, how large a data breach do you have to have before your company is going to go under? Or
They just lost 70% of their market value.
but they all have it back. They got it back within 18 months plus some, right?
And their share price went back up
And
and
their
higher.
share price
TJX
is back
also
up.
completely recovered.
Exactly. So there are some examples of, say, CAs, so certificate authorities that have gone under due to other, broad breaches and mismanagement. So one of the things that Hart Rossman at Lockheed Martin likes to say, we always talk about how defense is so hard because we have to get it right all the time, but the attacker only has to be, right once. But the thing is that no single cyber attack seems to have made any company go away, right? So, if you're in it for the long haul, right, why pay for more security when just enough security, whatever that is, will keep you going, and if you get lucky, you won't get a breach, or the other guy will get the breach first, and you'll know how much more you need to get incrementally to not have what happened to him happen to me, right? Or you can just get lucky all the way.
And speaking of that, there's a myth that people choose anything based on security. All right, I mean, one of the theories of HIPAA was people will pick their provider based on their security policies and how they do security. Truth is, people pick their provider based upon, number one, are they in my network? 2, are they close to my house? 3, can I pronounce their name? That's how they pick their provider.
2 points I'd like to just add before we go to another topic. When we say companies choose not to invest in security and just count on being lucky, that's not actually a bad strategy if it's done consciously. I think very often it's not done consciously. Another way of saying that is that they self-insure, meaning that they're willing to sustain the risk and the cost if that risk comes to fruition. I haven't seen many examples where it's done deliberately, but I think in the...
I don't think they realize that they're self-insuring until they end up...
Right, they don't think about it that way, but it
Large
could be.
banks consciously think about self-insurance.
Yeah.
So, right, now, I think a subsidiary point to that is that we're going to continue to see the emergence of an actual insurance industry, but that's going to take time because of this question of valuation, the equivalent of actuarial data, and how do you know what to charge. So the second point I'd like to make that's related to the other two is that is this question of societal norms. What do people really want for privacy? What do people really want for security? Privacy is a really good example because much of what people willingly put out on their internet profiles in an earlier era might have been viewed as unwise. Why would you do that? But I think there's a whole generational change component here that represents a change in norms. We may get to the global village. In the village, everybody knew everything about everybody else. There were no secrets. And society survived, people got along with that, and we may see something like that in the future. I think we're seeing something like that today, where people are just not that concerned with some of the things that in an earlier age we would have thought they should be concerned about in terms of personal privacy.
we'll get back.
So this is actually on the same topic, so.
Okay,
Also-
we'll really get back to it fast.
Also an economic person, so I look at economic cybersecurity. Market, you're quite right, we have the security that the market demands because it's a market failure. We don't have the right signals coming back to people on what they should be investing because they can free ride on other people, among other problems. So one solution people say is, well, then just change liability law. So if you sell software and that software ever gets attacked and broken, you are fully liable for any damages that come from that attack. And then you see software companies are going to spend a lot more money on security people, they're going to raise salaries, they're going to invest in
Or they're not going to develop software.
I'll
So
take.
what's the response?
Yeah, but I would take moderator's privilege here and say,
Okay.
and that means that there will be about 12 software companies.
Right, retract.
No, there won't. Those 12 will go out. I mean, here's the, it's not just the number of software companies, it's what the price of that software is going to be.
Yeah, it's all about.
The liability question, if we made car companies liable for every accident, irrespective of the cause, we would have much safer cars. They would cost $1 million each, and only very rich people will be able to afford them. So there's always a trade-off.
No, we'd have all these things that wouldn't be cars, but would have four wheels.
That's
and an
correct. That's the other thing. Is we would redefine. If you ever read a legal contract that says you will not sell, lease, assign, blah blah. Why do we do that? Because when you say you can't sell it says I didn't sell it. I just loaned it to you. Okay, you can't sell or loan it. I didn't loan it. I leased it. Okay, well, sell, lease. So the problem is again, any rule you set up, somebody's going to try to avoid.
Software, computer systems in general are subject to catastrophic failure in ways that cars are not. So when the security vulnerability is discovered in the iPhones, yes, we can attack millions of them within minutes. Now, Apple can distribute a patch, although Apple, unlike the other vendors, has chosen to make each person download the patch instead of doing an automated update. Now, automated update has other problems, but we don't see these problems in, say, storefronts. We know how to break into a storefront. If a problem is discovered with a physical lock, yes, that information can be widely disseminated. A few years ago, the circular locks that were used in bicycles, a wide-scale vulnerability was discovered. You could open them with a big pen. And people replaced those locks over the course of a year. And those locks stopped being sold. But we didn't have a distributed attack and every bicycle was stolen the next day. It just didn't happen.
We also didn't criminalize big pens.
Don't be so sure.
I needed on the sword.
So this is a distinct characteristic of the information technology for which there is no analog in other areas. There is an analog, I guess, in finance, right? When poisonous financial arrangements are discovered, they spread very quickly also.
So
And in biological systems.
what has to be grappled with here is more nuanced than just flat-out dictates about liability. There has to be the development of a true standard of due care. What is expected? And that is not something that can be dictated, say, by legislation. That has to evolve. I often say and think that we're going to deal with a lot of these issues for 50 years because it takes an evolution of social thinking that nobody can anticipate and nobody can drive. You can debate whether it can be accelerated, but I think that's a key question. What is the standard of due care for any institution anywhere that handles data in cybersecurity?
Well, and so I go back to the same thing, and I hate to just keep hitting it with the metrics shoot, but we can't have a standard of care until we can measure whether or not we can meet that standard. And you mentioned cyber insurance, and I think that the cyber insurance marketplace will definitely grow. And I think when there is a large data breach, the insurers will not be able to afford to pay, and we will end up with a bailout, just like we had in the financial markets. I think cyber insurance is going to be a scam for quite a long time until, once again, there are metrics and actuarial data like you mentioned, but we have no way of collecting that data because people aren't sharing breach information. So, it's not like how many times people fall off ladders, or I also, I like to use the analogy, and Simpson hates all of my analogies, but this one will work for a little while, of fire. So, fire, is a natural occurrence, okay, which is one bad thing. It's, well, sometimes we do have human actors that cause fire, so there it can happen. But, so fires are rampant, people would guy in tenements or in factories, so we started having new standards, right? Different materials, escapes. We had response teams that were trained to various levels of response, placed in certain areas. And we have this whole environment that is set to combat fire, although we never stop fire, right? But we can respond to it better, we understand more of its characteristics, right? So a lot about cyber is that way now. There are lots of attacks, we are developing response plans, we are trying to develop more standards, and eventually the whole analogy breaks down, but you see where I'm going.
That's fabulous.
No, thank you. Okay, so I'll stop now.
He's about to tear you apart.
I'll stay answering that.
Something more from the... Wait, go ahead.
How to deal with to be public and deal with privacy issues.
I'll jump in that. The first problem is we can't even define what we mean by privacy issues. We don't know what we mean by privacy. All right. There is a massive number of people out there who believe that if you're not doing anything wrong, what have you got to be afraid of? All right. The second thing is we are, as a society, and we are, first of all, we're not a society. We're many different societies, but we are grappling with the idea of what information should be private and from whom. And we have this whole issue about data ownership, data control. Most people believe are of two minds about privacy as well. If you ask them how important is privacy, they will tell you it's very important. If you watch what they do, they will treat it as if it's not important at all. So, for example, in this whole information sharing debate, there's some basic privacy principles, which is collect the minimum amount of information about somebody, tell them what you're using it for, and here's a critical one, use that information only for the purposes for which it's been collected. All right? So now I'm collecting log data. Why am I collecting log data? I'm collecting log data to see what's coming into my network and protect my network. Now I see something bad. I decide to share it with Simpson. Have I violated that principle? And the problem is there's so many incentives for me to share information or get information from somebody else, particularly when I have an economic benefit in doing so, for marketing, for sales, stuff like that, that I simply just don't tell people what I'm going to do. What does Google know about it? One of the big problems is people don't have an ability to find out what is known about them. And it's only going to get worse. We're working with the car companies. The car companies want to put GPS technology in the car itself to allow the cars to do collision avoidance, to do dynamic rerouting based on traffic, that kind of stuff. Because there's an inherent limitation on the number of roads you can build. And the only way to get more cars on the same roads faster is to essentially let the computers control the cars, which means they have to know where every car is. And we're going to collect a massive amount of personal data. We haven't even begun to think about what we're going to do with that.
When it comes to privacy, personal privacy, I always go back to, there was a popular song, I don't know how popular, back in the 90s, by the Spice Girls. Now, I'm not a Spice Girls fan, but I remember one piece of the lyrics, and I probably wouldn't approve.
If you turn the sound off.
And you'll remember this too. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want. And if you put that challenge before anybody, any one of us themselves, when it comes to privacy, if you were asked to specify what kind of information would be okay to share under what conditions, impossible task. There's so many conditional if-then else's in there that I don't think it can be done. So I think it's an intractable problem. It certainly will be with us forever, but it has to be dealt with. You can't just say, it doesn't exist.
I'm sorry, I'm coming back from your answer earlier. Now, for beginning, you were talking about the issue in the Fourth Amendment. How come there's a privacy issue? How come there will be a problem on the Fourth Amendment with this privacy issue aspect?
Right, a couple of myths about the Fourth Amendment. First of all, as commentators like to point out, the word privacy doesn't appear in the Constitution anywhere. The Fourth Amendment is intended, by its terms, to protect the people against unreasonable searches and seizures by the government.
I thought it was about quartering troops in your house.
Third.
for the
It is.
privacy thing.
No, and in fact, you know, the First Amendment was in fact the Third Amendment. There were 12 amendments to the Bill of Rights, only 11 of which were ratified, not 10, 11 were ratified. 10 were ratified right away. The 11th one was ratified in the 80s and is now the 27th Amendment. So,
Oh,
a bit of trivia for you. Because there was no expiration date on ratification. So it ended up getting ratified almost 200 years after it was proposed. But the purpose of the Fourth Amendment is to prevent unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. There's privacy implications to the Fourth Amendment, but at least in the United States, most people in the United States are more concerned about invasions of privacy by the government than invasion of privacy by corporations. That's changing as they start to see what corporations can and are doing with data. In Europe, that's probably reversed. In Europe, they're much more concerned about invasions of privacy by companies. But we live in a global economy. We don't have a consensus about what privacy is. We don't even have a consensus on who owns data, whose data it is. We have something called the third-party doctrine. And that is, if a third party generates or collects data about you, that information is owned by the third party, and they are free to do with it anything that they want. And if the government wants to get that information from the third party, they neither have to notify you or give you an opportunity to complain. The government can get your emails, your chat sessions. I just noticed that Michael is following me on Twitter. He just sent me a thing. I wanted, by the way, to change my Twitter name to Creepy White Guy in Van. So it'll say, Creepy White Guy in Van is following me. I think that would be pretty cool. I'm sure the name is taken.
But wait a second. If you say that you have a right to opt out of third-party data collection like that, then you have the right to tell me that I have to take your name out of my address book if you don't want it in my address book.
Yeah, that's the essence of privacy. Because
you have the right to tell me what I can put in my address
I have the right to do whatever the government gives me the right to do. That's the problem. You know, when we talk about it, we start with the idea of...
So I'm going to take a photo of you and you're going to say I have to delete it from my camera?
Yeah.
The right to be left alone. The right to be forgotten.
Yes.
That's right.
I don't think so.
Well, that's the problem. We're balancing different rights. You know, the seminal case on this was a 1974 case called Smith versus Maryland. And it's a very simple concept. And that is the government wanted to get Mr. Smith's phone records, his billing records. So they went to the Bell Company in Maryland and they issued a subpoena, and Bell turned over Mr. Smith's records. And Mr. Smith says, hey, wait a second. Those are my records. You either have to get them from me, or if you want to get them from the phone company, you have to get a search warrant. And the Supreme Court said, well, first of all, they're not your records. They're the Bell Company's records about how you use their service. The same way your bank records are records of the bank. Okay? So these are records of a third party. And to get records of a third party, if the Bell Company wanted to publish them online or sell them or do whatever they wanted, it's their records about how you use the service. It's called the third party doctrine. And that's now being used, I don't know if you're familiar with the Jones case in the Supreme Court earlier this term, about where the government put a GPS device on a guy's car.
Yeah.
I'll say without a warrant, although they did have a warrant. We'll say
Private investigation.
no.
No, it was just
Different case.
the warrant just expired.
It was,
So the
yeah,
warrant had
it
expired.
yeah.
Okay. And the majority went off on this concept of, the placing of the device as an infringement of the property rights of the owner, which I think is nonsense. I don't think the placing of the device infringes property rights any more than somebody putting a leaflet on your car infringes your property rights. But I believe that the invasion is the monitoring of the device, not the placing of the device on the car. Because the problem was that device was big. Eventually these things are going to be this big. How can you argue that putting something that big under a car is an invasion of a property right? I don't. That's why I limit it. But so the government lost that case on that property rights interest. And so what they have now done is they have gone back to the phone companies and subpoenaed Mr. Jones' phone records, his location records, historical location records, saying, well, inevitable discovery. We don't need it. We can get it from a third party. And that's what the government is doing a lot, is getting records from a third party. And the problem with the internet is everything about us, from what we're reading, what page we're on in a book, what songs we're listening to, and in what order, is going to be maintained online by a third party. So we need to fundamentally address the question, not of ownership. I'm willing to say the Bell Company owns that information, but of rights of use of information about people.
So ban cloud computing.
Well, no, you know,
I want to get to cloud computing here in a little while, but I want to kind of, I want to change, I'm going to co-moderate for a second. I think one of the things that's been very interesting to me, and I'd like to hear some of your guys' thoughts about it, and first, at some point later, I want to challenge the Spice Girl reference, but I don't have my computer up here to verify, is to talk about identity, so kind of to kind of carry on with privacy. The national strategy for trust identities in cyberspace is a national initiative that is being funded for a populace that doesn't seem to really care about that yet. Some feel that at some point we will have a single trust identity in cyberspace, and other privacy advocates feel that we should be able to have as many identities as we want. You can be a dog in cyberspace, or you can be lots of different dogs, I guess is the way you say it. There's an activist in California called Identity Woman who will explain to you, at length, some of the different reasons why you need to be, lots of different animals in cyberspace. But for me, once again, for property rights, etc. At some point, I think that identity has to all go back to the individual, because if I can open up credit cards as, Spot the dog, then I'll open up lots of those and they don't know.
And
that it's
Spot
me.
will have a credit record.
That's right, and someone can
Better
come
than
get
mine.
someone can come get him, when he doesn't pay. But if they can't get that, and they can't make that connection back to me, then it's a wonderful thing.
Well, but the idea is, so I've had this discussion with somebody at American Express, and I was explaining to her that back in 1986, American Express, I filled out an application and they gave me a card. And all they know is that the same person, that card is an account and it's been paid for the past 20 years, and that the card's address is usually the address that is the same as other cards from other companies, and that it also matches some real estate transactions. But they don't actually know that that card belongs to Simpson Garfinkel, or that I'm really Simpson Garfinkel. And in general, we're pretty bad about identity in this society. There's lots and lots of people who are walking around with the wrong names in their wallets. There was a security guard at an airport recently that was arrested because he was an illegal alien. He had picked up somebody else's identity and been using it for 20 years. Somebody who had died.
He was using it better than the other guy.
He was. And he was a security professional. So the whole identity thing is just so confounded. I use the distinction between talking about bodies and talking about people. And I say, that's a body, but the person is the thing that went to law school. And the person's the thing that has the academic credentials, and the person's the thing that buys property. And we normally link our people and our identity. You put bodies in jail, and there's a really interesting case where up in Baltimore or DC, where somebody was put in prison, and then the crimes started happening again. And the cop calls up the prison. He says, "Is this guy out yet?" And they say, "No, he doesn't go out for another 6 months." But the crimes keep happening. So the cop goes to the prison, to the jail, and says, "I want to see this person." He comes out, and it's the wrong person. So what had happened was, it was his turn to go to jail. He got a friend to go for him because the guy wanted to get fit, get those, 3 treadmills a day.
It was only for 6 months.
It was only for a year or so.
He thought he was going to take his SAT.
Hey, vacation.
And the drug dealer stays on the streets and keeps doing the crimes. Yeah, it's a good story.
Crucifixion. The song, by the way, is "Wannabe" by the Spice Girls, and he was right. I think we need to move away from identity a lot more. All right. One of the problems is that we frequently demand identity when we really want authorization.
Yes.
Okay? And we need to divorce those two. And this is an example right here. Why do you have a driver's license? You have a driver's license because in the 1910s and 1920s, we developed this thing called the automobile. And it was difficult to operate, and we wanted people then to have a license indicating that they had passed an examination showing they had competence in operating a motor vehicle. And my first driver's license was typewritten. My second one was computer printed. And it wasn't for another 10 or 15 years that I ended up with a photograph on it. Now I have holograms and all kinds of cool stuff.
That wasn't
The
your
only-
photo.
Well, I will tell you the story. I had once agreed to give a speech in New York to the Medical Society of the State of New York about legal issues in telemedicine at the exact same time that I had agreed to give a speech in San Francisco on the topic of privacy. And I actually appeared in person at both places and gave the speech at the same time. And I was able to do that because I have an identical twin brother. And he's a member of the Medical Society of the State of New York, because the definition of a lawyer is a Jewish boy who can't stand the sight of blood. He impliedly appeared fraudulently. He never identified who he was. There's a great story about a Nobel laureate who drives around the country because he hates to fly, giving a speech about his Nobel Prize-winning work in physics.
And his driver said.
And his driver, yes, he has his driver says, you know, I've heard that speech many times. I can give that speech. He says, okay, at the next place we go to, we'll switch. I'll wear the chauffeur's uniform. You give the speech. And the chauffeur comes up there and gives a speech perfectly. And the moderator says, are there any questions? And the guy raises his hand, asks an esoteric question about physics, and the chauffeur looks at him and he says, that's the stupidest question I've ever heard. In fact, my chauffeur can answer it. But the problem with identity...
It's way too much fun.
The problem with identity is when we tie everything to identity, there's a huge privacy trade-off. Because now we can track everything that identity is doing. And we don't need to. We need to divorce the idea of this person, whomever they might be, is authorized to drive a motor vehicle. They have a certificate, and it was issued to that person in the car, from who that person is and everything else that they're doing. I was here in just a couple of blocks away after September 11th, and the state of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia, wanted to put a biometric on a driver's license. And I'm sitting there listening, they're talking about all these biometrics they're going to put on the driver's license. And I said, you know, for identity management purposes, and I said, what exactly do you plan to do? What biometric do you want to put? And they said, we want to put a fingerprint on the driver's license. And I said, why? They said, well, you know, so we can show that the person in the car is the person in the driver's license. I said, what's going to happen? The cop's going to go like this? They'll be a database. I said, so what's going to happen is the guy, he's going to take the driver's license, take it to the car, put it in a scanner. The scanner will read the fingerprint on there and tell you who that person is. I said, well, why do you need the card? The guy's got the fingers. You know, you never want to use the thumb, the index finger, or the pinky finger, because those are the ones most likely to be injured. So you're going to pull the guy over and you're going to say, I need to see some ID. And you're going to go like this. He says, I need 2 forms of ID. And it's one of those things where we so tied stuff to identity. I actually did do that at the meeting. They did abandon the idea. But we are so tied to the concept of identity that we forget why.
Yeah, you can have
I'm going to push back just a little bit on that, because I think one of the goals of the NSTEC project, which, by the way, if you want to follow it on Twitter, there's a meeting that's far too important for me to get invited to at the White House right now on this question, is separating all of the different roles that we think of, and I hate to use the word ecosystem, but it is, I think, an identity ecosystem, sort of separating the question of ID proofing from the process of identity credentials, and separating the process of authorization from access control, and all of these things where in the offline world we roll them up together. In a digital environment, it is possible to build sets of institutions where we can have this. And going back to economics, the challenge is how do we create value so that people will ultimately want to buy in? Why would someone become an identity provider? Who's going to pay them? Especially if we want privacy, which means that their value, they can't make money just on selling all the data that comes through them. How do we get people to become relying parties if there is risk involved in becoming a relying party?
Does American Express care if he's Simpson as long as the bill is paid?
No, because American Express is built around an established risk model. And the challenge, and this is one of the things that, so the government has addressed 4 levels of assurance, each of which has certain risk assumptions that have been formally defined or are in the process of being formally defined by NIST. Those probably will not be sufficient. They'll need to be something more granular. And the challenge is, how do you have that kind of risk management without point-to-point contracting, because that's wildly inefficient.
And stick approach is that it's the government trying to put something into the private industry that I think the government should be doing. Governments issue driver's licenses. We issue identity papers. We call them passports. And for a lot of people, the government has issued digital IDs. And a good way to, yeah, well, HSPD 12 cards. And a good way for moving forward would be to simply get private industry to start accepting the HSPD 12 cards. We have several million Americans walking around with these every day. People in the military, people in federal government.
But actually, at the moment, private industry is not allowed to accept these as right?
They can certainly accept it. It's a public key system, standards-based. You don't need permission to use it.
But then that goes back to the idea of, do we want Big Brother tracking us? And we resisted for so many years to have a one public ID. We do. No, we don't. Because that's all based. Some driver's licenses used to be based on Social Security numbers, but then that was taken off, and others were not. And so the only one we have is a Social Security number, and although many private firms are using it as a key thing, it is supposedly illegal to use it.
You're confusing identifier and identity. The identity is your name, your date of birth, your parents, the whole constellation of facts that uniquely identify you as a person. For my identical twin sons, it's their birth order. And then we have records and names that are tracked to that, and educational records, so they actually are different people. But it's one thing to have an identity, and it's another thing to have an identifier.
One thing, and I think that's a huge distinction that the digital environment allows us to build on, right? So rather than having to show my driver's license, which has multiple identifiers, some of which have value as data as well as being an identifier, I just need a token that someone will trust, that says, I'm over 21 and therefore give me my goddamn beer. And the challenge is, so what is the risk that someone is willing to tolerate? Well, a bar that serves Kevin, that gets caught doing it, faces certain fines. So they need to be able to serve enough people quickly to allow some fraud through. And I think that's really the question of how do you come up with a generalized model to do that. It turns back to metrics and that.
And of course, in this state model, though, is you've got your choice. Mandate everyone walks around with a CAC, and the government could watch what you're doing, but oh, by the way, the government is under Freedom of Information Act. Most of the time, they follow the rules and regulations, although in times of war, which we seem to be perpetually in, they don't have to, or they claim they don't have to, or Congress passes laws that retroactively say, all that illegal stuff that a service provider did, that's really okay. Or on the other side, and a number of people are not comfortable with this, is that Facebook is your identity provider. And actually,
Until they go bankrupt.
Yeah, and then the assets get sold, and where does your data go? And so, in the theme of this panel was, is there a better way? Now, before we jump into that, I think we are going to end up with a privacy panel. and the PII panel. Mike, you've been wanting to go.
Yeah, I just want to say I hope we have an Identity 2020 panel, because I do think this merits a lot longer, deeper discussion. I think it is fundamental to getting cybersecurity right. But I want to change topics. And in the past, a lot of the people in charge of corporate security and corporate IT security had a policy of security through obscurity. We'll build our system, but we won't tell anybody how we build it. That way nobody will ever be able to figure out how to penetrate it. That seems not to be working. And it seems that we're instead going the other way, and some companies are moving towards security by transparency. If you share a lot of information about what databases you have, and you collect information on who's accessing those databases, you can very quickly spot when somebody who's not authorized is getting into those databases, or somebody downloads 3/4 of the data. These things, it's a different approach, but we still have the old mindset. We still have a lot of security people who still think obscurity is the best policy. Hide everything you're doing. Don't let people know what operating system you're using. Make sure you're using a 15-year-old operating system that no hacker would, in their right mind, would even know, let alone know how to hack.
My Amiga is pretty secure, by the way.
Pardon me?
My Amiga is let me point out two things about that. There's a different form of security through obscurity that I see in the corporate mindset, and that is, why would anybody want to go after me? They don't see themselves as targets. And I think, to a great extent, these hacktivists have demonstrated how people who never thought that they would ever be a target, nobody would ever want to go after them, could find themselves instantly being a target of a concerted attack, and they're not prepared for
And not only that, Mark, but also the data that they didn't consider as being important or
that.
proprietary.
Turns out to be very critically important. If you were to go to Barnes & Noble, their main concern is that they can get paid for whatever they sell. And they're sitting there going, we're not going to be attacked. And it's hard to make a business case that they should double or triple the amount of money they're paying on security when A, they haven't been attacked, and B, their big concern is PCI compliance, okay? And that's it. So it's that kind of obscurity. And the trend that I see, and it has to do with cloud, is security not through transparency, but security through SEP. Someone else's problem.
Yeah.
And that's the whole purpose of cloud, is that security, availability, integrity, blah, 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 becomes someone else's problem because I have a contract with them and they said they'll do it.
You don't think China's going to give us really good security for all of our private data? I think they're going to give us fabulous security.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I want to kind of talk about the kind of security by obscurity. So when you say, the opposite of that is more transparency, part of it is also standards, right? So we have more open standards now. That can be a good thing. More eyes on different products to gauge their effectiveness. But then also, you don't have to advertise to everyone which standard products you're using. So maybe that's not obscurity. Maybe that's just confidentiality of my environment. But there is still some amount of that people rely on that's not necessarily useful. Now that we're talking about the cloud, I just see the cloud as just one more dip, or I'll say dip in the evolutionary cycle of security. How much different is this than the big data, the glass house from 1 or 2 generations ago? And my biggest concern is that when this generation is ended, where are my music files? When iTunes decides that they don't want to give it to me anymore, that's why I still buy CDs, because I want to be able to have my stuff. When the era of personal computing comes back again, maybe by 2020, I don't know.
Last question.
Okay. Talking about cybersecurity, talking about this today, who is the biggest threat of the United States in terms of cybersecurity?
He's a researcher, there you go.
No, I have a little card. We're not allowed to do that.
I didn't mean your entity, I meant you personally.
Oh, I don't do security.
And let me just, did you ask who or what the biggest threat to cybersecurity was?
Oh, yeah.
You did, oh, you went there. Okay.
Well, actually, I'll jump in. The biggest threat is grandma in Iowa. Grandma in Iowa. You look at the attacks on Estonia, came from grandma in Iowa. Attacks on our critical infrastructure come from grandma in Iowa. Well, identity comes from grandma's PC in Iowa. You know, a lot of people like to pick on China. Trust me, I think China, you know, like you, we're probably not being sarcastic there. China would be in a lot of hurt if our power grid went down. Because who's going to buy all those PCs? And likewise, we would get real upset. You know, look what happened to us when Thailand got flooded. And we couldn't buy any PCs. You know, the world's very interconnected. And you know, that does get us to the tragedy in the commons issue, because since it is grandma, but it's not really grandma, it's her machine's been taken over. You know, what responsibility, and we're talking about liability. So do we put grandma in jail? Do we not allow grandma to have a PC? Do we not allow her grandson to write this cool little game that happened to have a vulnerability in it that allowed someone to get in and take control of her machine? Put him in jail.
Hold the ISPs
so-
or the service provider
Well, yeah, so-
responsible.
Go to the ISP.
Notification that
Yeah,
the
they
computer
shouldn't give us
is compromised.
connectivity in the first place.
So-
But yeah, so the other, you know, major adversary here are ourselves. So as we see attacks going up, farther and farther up the stack, if we were writing more secure applications or just better applications, maybe, you know, just better would make them more secure with few vulnerabilities. But then it ends up being, you know, layer 8, wetware, whatever you want to call us, you know, we users that, you know, just want to click that link that, you know, gives, you know, authorization for bad stuff to happen. And that will continue to be one of the major, you know, threat vectors in 2020. How users actually interact with the external environment, with their own systems, is still going to remain one of the biggest cybersecurity challenges of the day.
But if your question is who are the bad guys, I think the answer is complicated because it depends. There's different targets and different sets of adversaries are interested in the different targets.
Different bad things.
Different bad things. So there are those who are anarchists who might want to cause denial of service attacks, or maybe they have some political agenda. There are those who are trying to steal intellectual property, or those who are trying to steal money. So there's a range of targets and a range of actors worldwide who have an interest in alignment with those targets.
Guys, you're making this all much more complicated than it needs to be.
Speak up.
So you're all making it much
That's
more
the academic
complicated
stuff.
than it needs to be. There's really only one problem that we need to address, and that's complexity.
Well, yeah, but it's complex.
So the problem is, and the reason systems are less secure now is because they're dramatically more complicated than they used to be, and we use complexity as a way for making systems go faster, be more efficient, or for getting more features. If you look at the Mac, the control panels have all gotten dramatically more complex with each release of Mac OS. And now there are advanced buttons, and there are actually advanced buttons underneath the advanced buttons. It's very bizarre. And we don't want to build things that are simple. That we keep making our systems just better and better and better. And that complexity is what creates the security vulnerabilities.
Yep, good point.
Partly. The other things that do is like, you know, 30 years ago, there weren't that many computer scientists around. So we have more people with more experience and more training on computers, and therefore on computer hacking abilities. We're more interconnected, we're more dependent, more data on more complex systems. So we have all of those things operating against us. Or,
The increased dependency goes hand in hand with the complexity. It wouldn't matter so much if they were just taking down our Pac-Man networks, right? And if we couldn't play Duke Nukem or whatever the current tech is.
and there's real money. You know, the other thing about it, you talked about ISPs. The internet was designed with the presumption and the assumption that the pipes and the communications networks were insecure and would remain insecure. And there's a huge social problem on imposing liability and responsibility on the ISPs. Because then the ISPs are going to want to read every packet. And once they read every packet, they're going to make a business case from what they've read. And so I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing.
Well, I'm just talking about a service provider. It may not be an ISP, it may be a Cox or, you know.
That's the
maybe-
problem with all.
Whoever's providing the service to the grandmother should be responsible for notifying her that her computer is compromised.
So they should notify all of their customers.
Right, all of their customers.
Every customer's computer is compromised.
Right.
But that's where you get economics, because most Cox does this. think Verizon does it, Comcast certainly does it. They give away antivirus software. Now, is that because of altruism? They want grandma to be protected? Not really. Is that because they want to stop these attacks as a patriotic duty? Not really. It's because these attacks suck bandwidth. And particularly they suck backbone bandwidth, which is what's expensive. And also, when grandma calls and says, my PC is running slow, and it takes 7 minutes to diagnose that, you've just wiped out the profit for the year. And at that point, it's a lot cheaper for them to pay $12 a seat to give away, because McAfee's not, and Symantec are not giving it to them. They're paying for it, but cost-benefit analysis works very well. Thomas, do you have anything on the topic? Or actually, in fact, we'll let you kick off in summary.
Well, in summary, we are in a certain place, and yet with respect to security on the internet, but we cannot throw up our hands and say, well, everything we've done is wrong, and we need to do something completely different. I would assert that no, everything we've done is right. Does not completely affect. But security challenges are going to be with us forever. I even think if you've been following the singularity concept, that once we pass the singularity, and I hope you're familiar with what I mean by that, it's not that security goes away, because anytime there's a need to keep a secret, which I think is sort of part of human nature, there's going to be a security challenge. So you just have to face the real world and do the best you can.
I thought humans went away before we reached the singularity.
No.
So
Just a singularity.
that's right. Mark?
Now, the bad news is that nobody will do anything until there's a global catastrophic failure. The good news is there will be a global catastrophic failure. At that point, we will all overreact. And I'm being a little bit facetious here, but the truth is, we're going to keep muddling through. We're going to have not enough security. We're going to keep having bad things happen. We're going to have harm, and the marketplace will adjust. And when we perceive that there's a market incentive to do more, we will do more. And otherwise, if you look at the global payment system, there's plenty of stuff we can do to reduce fraud. There's plenty of stuff that we can do to reduce identity theft and stuff. But the truth is, it's built into the system, and we muddle through, and we're going to keep muddling through.
Already somewhere.
Okay, great. Zach?
Well, so I want to end by disagreeing with Mark, because I don't really think there will be a global catastrophic failure.
Oh, just wait. Simpson has. Once he gets
he's got a plan. All right. But I think the muddling through is what's going to happen. There will be point catastrophic failures.
Yes.
And some people will overreact. Some people will say, well, that'll never happen to me. And we will continue to muddle through. But I think that's the nature of the system.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for coming out today, and I know we're all wallflowers and don't really like to talk much. Thank you to SRI again for a wonderful venue, and there's probably a couple more bagels and coffee if you want to sip a little bit of that. People will probably be available just afterwards, but thank you all for your participation, and for the remote people for putting up with our banter. Thank you all very much.